Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me on today's topical webinar. Now, we normally have a basic and advanced webinar once a month for all of our labeling products here at TechLinks, as we recognize there is a lot to learn about in the labeling world. And because of this, we've launched a series of training webinars focused on specific topics that we expect most of our users to face, or topics that we feel could greatly improve your current labeling process. Today's webinar is going to focus on automation. Going to be a bit different than our previous webinars in that this is a two-part series, and today's is going to focus solely on our CodeSoft labeling software. Our next webinar in the series will focus on Sentinel, one of our enterprise products. As always, there is a bit of expected knowledge in these topical webinars, pretty much everything that we cover in the basic and the advanced webinars. It's going to walk you through setting up the internal drivers in the software, setting up the label template, height, width, margins, getting objects on a label, objects being text fields, barcodes, and images, and then we also go over the variables as well. Again, for today's webinar, I'll be focusing on CodeSoft, which is very similar to our label view software, with the exception of one of the features I'll be covering called PortWatch. And for our label matrix users, these functions are unfortunately not available. However, we still invite you to watch these webinars just so you can get a better understanding of what these other products are capable of. And if you do like what you see, it's a very simple process to import your existing label matrix labels into these other products like LabelView and CodeSoft, as we have built-in label converters. Also, if you'd like to have the software on your end as we're going through the webinar, our moderator, Tony, will be sending out a link to that shortly. It's going to be fully functional for 30 days. Now, just to introduce myself, my name is Rob Learman. I am an enterprise support technician here at TechLinks. I've worked here for a bit over 10 years now, so I'm pretty familiar with the industry. I recently moved from Wisconsin to Arizona. Gotta say, I don't miss those Wisconsin winters. And to the right, you'll see the little TechLinks mascot, Maya. Just a few housekeeping items to get out of the way before we get started. You've probably already noticed all the headsets, telephones, microphones, those are all muted on your end. That is done proactively. Just when we get quite a few individuals in these webinars, the lines can get a bit cluttered. So as I said, we do mute those. There is a question section in the GoToWebinar console, excuse me. So if you do have any questions during the webinar, you can chat those in and they can be addressed by our moderator, Tony. Now that we have that housekeeping item in place, let's move into our agenda for today's webinar. So we'll start out by trying to identify if your printing process is too manual or if it can be improved upon. After that, we'll talk about how printing through database connections and using PortWatch can greatly improve any current manual process. We'll then take a look at printing with forms rather than through the label design software, so you can better enforce your ideal printing process. Then we'll jump into the software itself, show you some of those concepts, and lastly, we'll go over some Q&A together. Now, before we look at trying to identify if your current process is too manual, let's take a look at the software we'll be using for the webinar. CodeSoft is our most sophisticated label design software. It can be used to integrate into your existing business or ERP systems. It's essentially our springboard to our enterprise level software. The user interface is very similar to LabelView. However, only CodeSoft will be able to integrate with our enterprise products such as Sentinel, Label Archive, and TechLinks Central. This software is actually going to be a great fit if your company requires an advanced or scalable solution, as you can just start with the label design software, CodeSoft, and then at a later point add on the enterprise products for more advanced automation when you have time. Now, the main question this webinar hinges on is if your current labeling process is too manual. So do you have multiple label templates do you have multiple labels rather than a few select templates? Like if you have 500 different part numbers or items or whatever it is you may be shipping or labeling, it's very time consuming and work intensive to have 500 different label files to keep track of. If you're also using something like a scale or a scanner or a keyboard wedge, are you gathering that information from the hardware, jotting it down, then walking over and manually updating a label template, it's all very time consuming and prone to error. So more steps in any process will have that extra room for error. And as we all know, time is money. Now, if you do have multiple label templates, one for each part number or SKU number, or again, whatever it is you're shipping or labeling, database connections are going to really make this process easier for you. Again, if you have 500 items and you end up creating 500 different label templates, again, very time consuming. For the most part, each field, if for the most part each field is the same, it's in the same location, the main difference is something like an item number or SKU number or description. It's much easier just to take that data and place it in something simple like an Excel sheet, just a simple spreadsheet. So that's where the data is now stored and managed. If you get a new part number, all you're doing is adding a new record to the spreadsheet. If one becomes obsolete, you're removing it. If one is updated, you're just updating a record in an Excel sheet. So at this point, you can create a connection to the label template, and you only have one database file and one label template. The fields in the label are now variables rather than static data. So this is essentially two files to manage rather than perhaps 500 individual ones. If your printing process involves something like a scanner or a scale or maybe a keyboard wedge, and you're currently grabbing that data, again, jotting it down and then bringing it over to the software and typing it in, again, that's very time consuming. CodeSoft has a feature called PortWatch. It can capture data and automatically place it on your label. It removes some of those more manual and time consuming steps. PortWatch can also continuously pull, meaning that the print job is actually initialized from the output of the device. So if this is a scale we're talking about, every time something is weighed, CodeSoft would print out a label. Alternatively, every time something is scanned, the software would print out a label. Now, once the label template is created using either databases or PortWatch, you may also want to have more control over what an end user is seeing or has access to at print time. So out of the box, CodeSoft can print from the design software. However, the end user also has the ability to modify the label template itself. So CodeSoft has the ability to create custom forms that the end user will see at print time, and that's going to be called Form Designer. And this will keep them out of the design interface entirely. The forms are highly customizable. I almost like to think of it as VB scripting without the actual scripting. You can choose what labels the end user sees, control what data is entered, or allowed at print time. This is going to greatly reduce any errors on the production line, as only what should be printed will actually be printed. So we're about to jump into the live training demonstration. We'll start with the fittings label. It's actually a sample label that comes with CodeSoft. And we're just going to look at a few different iterations of that label. So we'll start with a very static fittings label, then we'll add on some when printed fields. Then we'll show you adding the database connection using a table lookup. And lastly, what that would look like printing through PortWatch. And then we'll end all of that with showing you the form through form design. Now, a note on the form demonstration. We're not going to take a deep dive into that. We do have our own topical webinar that covers form design. It's about 45 minutes to an hour. So if you are interested in that after viewing it, chat out to our moderator and he can send you the link for that. So I'm just going to pause for just a moment here and switch over to my VM with CodeSoft on it. Give me just a moment here. Okay, so we should be seeing CodeSoft. Again, I have that fittings label up, and this is all static information, so very manual. So if we wanted to print, we could go to File and Print, or click on the Print button up in the top. There's not a whole lot we can choose here. We're choosing a printer, we're choosing a quantity, and we'll click the Print button. So if you have more part numbers, those part numbers have different descriptions or sizes or quantities or maybe images associated with them. If you needed to print one of those, you'd either take this existing label, click in the text field, modify this, modify the other text fields, modify the image, and then click print. I've also seen alternatively, you can do a file save as, then you have 2 different label templates, one for each part number. But again, if you have 500 different part numbers, you would then have 500 different labels to manage. And that can, as I said earlier, get pretty time consuming. So a step up from having static fields would be using when printed fields. So I've already got this label set up with when printed fields. Just going to close this one down. We'll launch that. Same label. We just now have when printed fields. So this is still fairly manual, but a little bit easier for you. You would, again, go to File and Print. And we have the Form tab in our simple print window. And we can at least update some of these variables. So again, still manual. So you'd have to know what part numbers you're printing. You have to go back and forth. So there's still added steps that can be removed. A big step up from here is adding a database connection. First thing I'm going to do is we're going to show you the snapshot of the table we're pulling from. It's a very simple spreadsheet. You'll see each part number is listed here, description, size, quantity, picture. There's only 12 records in this spreadsheet, but it's very simple. You just have to take the time to actually add all of that to a spreadsheet, and it can be Excel, Access, Oracle, SQL, FoxPro, AS400. Really, the sky's the limit with what the software can connect to. But again, it's going to make things much simpler for you, because now we have one database to manage and then one label template. And when we go to File and Print, we have the Database tab, and we can just pick and choose records we want to print. Alternatively, we can view that snapshot again. You can also print through this window. So you can create batch files. So maybe you want to skip a few records, print 5 of record 5. We can print 10 of record 10. So we would be pushing out 15 labels, but data for only those 2 records. So just different methods of print. Now, taking sort of a lateral step, we can show you table lookups as well. So a table lookup, again, bit of a recap from the basic and the advanced webinars. It's very similar to a database connection. So with the database connection, you're connected to the exact same spreadsheet. The main difference is what your end user is seeing at print time. When your end user goes to File and Print with that database connection, they're viewing a snapshot of the table. They're scrolling up and down, highlighting a record and clicking print. And if you have maybe a couple thousand records, that can be pretty time consuming if you need to sort of hunt a record down. The table lookup, again, still pulling from the exact same spreadsheet. We're just not seeing a snapshot of the table. It's prompting us for a key field, and depending on what data we type in here, it would just automatically pull that record. So again, for this purpose, the main difference between database and table lookups is sort of what you want your end user to see at print time. We're actually going to show you PortWatch now. This is, again, if you're sort of connected to a piece of hardware, whether it's a scanner, a scale, or a keyboard wedge. And PortWatch is sort of similar to the table lookup that I just showed you. The table lookup on the previous label was using a when printed field. So you'd go to File, Print, you'd type something in that when printed field. It would then query the database and display that record. It's going to be very similar for PortWatch. Again, just to throw back to the advanced webinar, we'll show you the variable here. Main thing is you're changing it from local to PortWatch. You're setting up the device by clicking the device button. So we have quite a few devices listed in here. If you're not sure what yours is, you can always choose generic and set it up through there. It's a little bit harder for the audience to see if I have a scale or a keyboard wedge or a scanner on my end. So I'll try my best to showcase that to you. But for now, I'm using keyboard wedge, just using my keyboard. Looking at some of the settings down here, this is the port it's connected to, so it's just going to be the keyboard port. Enable filter. This is more for if you have a scanner or a scale. When you connect some of those third-party devices, sometimes there will be start and stop characters that get sent down. So let's say you weigh something or scan something, there might be a start character, the actual data that you want, and then a stop character. So the filter can filter out those start and stop characters so that the only thing that's displayed on the label is the data that you want displayed. And the terminator option is going to tie into polling, continuous polling. So let's say you want a setup where it's just running in the background, and the second you weigh something, it pushes out a label, or the second you scan something, it pushes out a label. The software needs to know at what point it should stop grabbing data and then push out a label. And right now, because I'm using a keyboard, I have a carriage return set up in here. So whenever I type some data and hit enter, which is essentially the carriage return, it would know to push out a label. We can, if we are setting up a device, you can click test, we'll see a little radar dish pop up. It's sort of waiting for input. You can see I just typed in one of the records here and hit enter, and then it grabbed that data. So this is what would theoretically display on the label. So that's what we're looking for. So two ways I'll show you printing with Portwatch. First way, I'm just going to print to a PDF file just so we can actually see a label printed out. We'll go to File and Print. We'll keep it at this PDF printer. We'll change the quantity to 3. I'll click Print. It's trying to save a PDF file here. I'll just, we'll call this test and place it on the desktop. And now it's waiting to scan something, or in my case, type in some data. It's grabbed that and it's created that PDF file. It should be on our desktop. There we go. So if we open up that PDF, we'll see 3 of those labels with that part number that I typed in. Now, again, there's still extra steps in there. If we want to do that continuous polling, that one's going to be a little bit harder to showcase for you. So what I've done is I've set up one of the internal drivers in the software, and it's connected to the LPT port, so it's not really going to go anywhere. I don't have the printer connected, but we can display this print spooler. Make sure it's paused so we can capture the data. And every time I scan something, or every time I weigh something, or every time I type something in, we'll see print jobs get created in here. Now to do that in the software, rather than clicking print, to the right of the print button is a little drop down. We'll click on that and choose infinite. Alternatively, if you want to change the default method or action for the print button, we can use the tools drop down, choose configuration. Jump down to the printing tab here, and then we'll change the format from simple to infinite. So at that point, every time you use the shortcut Control P or go to File and Print or click on the print button, it would use that infinite print. So we'll select that. We'll see it pop up. It's letting me know it's paused. And now it's just kind of hanging around in the background, waiting for you to weigh something. It's waiting for you to scan something, or in my case, type something in. So I'll type something in, hit enter. It's going to create a label, and now it's just waiting for another input. Create another label. And we can just keep going on and on until we close this down. So very useful, a very simple method to automate the environment if you have something like, as I said, scales or scanners or keyboard wedges. But now that we've walked through better automating the environment, maybe you're adding one printed field, or maybe you're adding a database connection or a table lookup, or using Portwatch. That's all sort of done on the label template itself. So we sort of call that the label logic. At that point, if you want to start looking at maybe narrowing down or controlling what the end user is printing, that's where we take a look at form design. So again, the label logic is set up. They could jump into the software here, go to File and Print out these labels, but they can also, accidentally modify the label template. So if you want to remove those capabilities and have them not launch the software itself, we would launch something called Form Designer. Now, again, Form Designer, as I said, it's like it's very similar to Visual Basic, but just without the scripting. You're building the form from scratch. Just showed up minimized down there. Here we go. So it's a very blank form. You can see we can add labels, text fields, buttons, drop downs, combo boxes, previews, database grids. So again, just to reiterate, we're not going to jump into creating a form from scratch on this topical webinar. We do have a previous topical webinar available for you. Again, I think it's about 45 minutes to an hour, but you can download that and review that. What I will show you, however, is one of the included samples that comes with CodeSoft called the generic form. This one can be sort of easily modified to fit your environment. Maybe you want to change the logo here. You can just click on the JPEG pointed to a different image. Otherwise, you can highlight it and delete it entirely. Same with the URL here. But the rest of this is going to be very useful. This is just a directory. It's a object pointing to a directory, pulling from a directory, I should say. And this is where all the label templates are. So if you want to modify where this is pulling from, you just click on the folder and choose the dropdown. You can change it to a different folder. Below that is just showing you that it's only going to display .lab files. Those are all the CodeSoft label templates. You can have extra text files or database files in there, and the end user is not going to see those at print time. They'll only see the .lab files. Below that is a list of the variable inputs. So if you're selecting a label up here, that label has when printed fields, you'll be able to enter that information down here. This big blank area is actually a preview. So when I launch the form later and I select a label, we'll see that label displayed here in a preview. Below that is the printer selection. Really only one thing we can change here, and that's what printers are displayed, whether it's internal drivers, that would be the THT drivers, the Windows drivers, or a combination of both. And then we have the quantity, the settings button, which will display the printer settings, and then the print button itself. And again, the nice thing about this is we can close this down. We can close CodeSoft down. And if this is really a production PC, something maybe on a production line, you could even remove some of the the shortcuts for CodeSoft so they can never launch it, or you can give it a password so they wouldn't know how to launch it, or they wouldn't have access to it, and just have the form file on the desktop. And when they launch that, they'll get their print form. And this is all they can do. They can highlight a record, a label template, maybe modify some of the variable data down here, choose a printer, we'll grab that PDF printer again, maybe put in a quantity, and then kick off a print job. And we're just creating a PDF file here, which I don't think I saved to my desktop. But yes, again, you're sort of locking down what the end user has the ability to do. So let's pause here for a second. I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint. All right, should be seeing that now. Just a brief recap of what we covered. Again, identifying if your current process could be more efficient. If you do have multiple label templates, if they're all sort of, all over the company on shared drives, on different servers, different workstations, start to think about consolidating and then trying just to remove extra steps in that print process. Again, less steps, less room for error. You can also do that by utilizing database connections to print with a record, also print using Portwatch. And again, you can always create your ideal printing process with forms. Again, that's the only thing that your end user would be seeing. So I have a quick poll that I want to launch. It's going to involve which feature would you find most beneficial in your label environment. You should be seeing that soon. Looks like most are choosing that top option. kind of figured Portwatch might not have the most votes. Not everybody has a scale that's sort of unique, but again, it's very useful if you do have a scanner. Yeah, I'll go ahead and share this. It looks like by far the database connections is the winner. If you do want, if you want some direction on that, you can always, again, reach out to our moderator, Tony. We've officially hit that Q&A section. I'm just going to take a brief pause here. I'm just going to sort through some of the questions that the moderators have been going through, just see if there's anything I can speak on or display in the software maybe. So bear with me for just a moment. Just going over some of these, some of them are pretty straightforward. Can I easily set up the same database connection on multiple workstations? You certainly can. Let's switch over to CodeSoft. I can show you where that's located. All the database connections created in CodeSoft can be managed under the Administrator ODBC or Administrator OLE. If it's done using the wizard within the software, it's going to be an OLE connection. They'll be listed here. You can copy and paste these to any other workstations, and these are saved as .udl files, I believe. And if you want to find those locations on a specific workstation, again, a bit of a recap from the, I want to say the basic or the advanced webinar. It's going to be in the default folders. It's this very bottom directory right here. So all the database connections created through the wizards are listed right in there. You can copy and paste those between workstations. You can also have multiple workstations pulling from that same directory. Another question I noticed, pretty easy to showcase. Can we lock down fields so that users can't edit them? A couple of ways to do that. Adding any generic text field, doesn't matter if it's a variable. You can right click on that and choose lock. That'll just lock it in place, but they have the ability at that point to unlock it and then modify it. You can also set up passwords in the software by going to tools and set password. And at that point, they won't be able to get into the design aspect of the software. Is there a way to prevent incorrect data in the form, like too many characters? Yeah, so if we're creating any any variable, the output tab is going to have an output mask. I think numbers are going to be pound signs, and letters are at symbols. So if you need like 3 numbers, a dash, and 3 more numbers, you can type in something like this. That will force them to keep that form. You can also limit the minimum and maximum amount of characters this way. Okay, there's a good question. If multiple label printers are connected to the same workstation, can one printer address be saved with label file? Under tools and configuration, the very top two drop-downs are going to tie into that. So you can load the printer saved in the document. So if this is checked off, you're creating a label template. And as you're creating it, you would select a printer. When you click save, close that down, reopen it. If since I have chosen a different printer, it would open up the label template and launch that printer that was saved with the label. There's a question on how can we make our database printing automated. It's actually a good question that ties into, again, this being a sort of a two-part series. Next week, Thursday, will be part 2 of this. And Scott will be going over those exact same steps. He'll specifically be going over adding a record in the database, and that's actually what triggers the print job. There's a question that popped up. Is there a webinar for using VB scripting? Unfortunately, there's not. VB scripting sort of opens up the software in that you can pretty much do whatever you want. Whatever you can write up in VB code or VB script is going to be available in the software. It's not something that's easily tackled by just a short hour-long webinar. Question about if you're not able to make next week's webinar. We do record these, so if you sign up for this one and you do want to see next week's, but you're just unable to make it, you can give our customer service a call or chat the moderator, Tony. He'll jot your address down, your email address, and we'll make sure to get you a link for that download so that you can view it. And again, just to reiterate, this is a 2-part series. So next Thursday, that's going to be going over the same concept, better automating your environment. He'll be using CodeSoft as well as Sentinel, mostly focusing on Sentinel. There's a good, slightly tricky question that came up. How can you pull data from multiple tables if your data is not all in one table? So if you're going to undergo tackling going from more of a manual process into an automated process, one of those steps might be consolidating the information into the same table. If that's not possible, you can create a database connection to one of the tables within CodeSoft and then have multiple table lookups. So what we showcased before was the table lookup was based off of a when printed field. So I would type in some data. The software would query that, display that record. Same with Portwatch, we would scan something, it would query that, and then pull from the database. If you already have a database connection on the label template, you would simply have table lookup query off of the record you're selecting. So you're sort of daisy chaining tables together that way. So yes, it absolutely can be done. Looks like the questions are sort of dying down here, so we'll disconnect in a few minutes here, but I just want to let you know that we will keep the webinar running so that we can answer all of the questions. Well, I want to thank you all for joining me on this topical webinar, and I hope you all have a good rest of your afternoon. Again, I'm going to disconnect from the session. However, we'll leave it running just so that we can finish answering all of these questions. Again, have a good rest of your afternoon.